Hey guys, we are on Unit 8, and this is day 3, and we're going to learn a third method for solving a quadratic, okay, or a trinomial, okay, anything with a squared term is a quadratic, okay? So we know that factoring sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes you can't find the numbers that work in the multiply and the add. Okay, so when you can't find the numbers, it makes the quadratic not factorable, and therefore you can't solve for x. So we learn completing the square will help us solve for x. It is a lengthy process with a lot of directions to follow in the procedure. And so there is a formula. And remember, formulas are supposed to make things easier. All right, the formula is made, hard to memorize sometimes. But all you have to do is take the variables in the formula and replace them with the numbers from the problem and clean it up. So back in the day, some mathematician did that. It's called the quadratic formula. It will help you solve for x equals if you use it. Problem is, you got to remember it, and it is quite lengthy. All right. So they actually sing this formula to a tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. And so they say x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a to help you memorize it. However, you don't actually have to memorize it. It's on your reference sheet. So you will always have that formula, but a lot of people sing the song in their head and actually don't end up not even needing to look at the formula. So here is how we do it. I do usually a 4-step process. I plug in, clean up all the stuff underneath the radical. Then, because most of the time the directions will say simplest radical form, we will simplify that radical, and then we will simplify our final answer, okay, which is the fraction. All right, so here we go. Again, I could try to factor this. However, I don't think I would find numbers that multiply to 1 and add to -6. So as of right now, I know that my answers to this quadratic are most likely irrational. Okay, and so we'll go ahead and say that a equals, which is one of our variables in our formula, b and c. And so a in this case is 1. And remember, to solve our a, b, and c, we have to be equal to 0. And in this one, we are. And so a is 1, b is -6, and c is +1 also. All right, so now what we do is we go and we plug into our formula with those 3 variables, and it's going to read x equals negative b. So be careful. There's a negative in the formula in front of the b, and then our b is also negative. So there's 2 negatives, which will turn positive in the next step. Plus or minus the square root, and right now our square root is nice and long because we got a lot of stuff to fit underneath it. Your b, which is negative, squared. Now, if you write that without parentheses and you type it in your calculator without parentheses, you're going to get a wrong answer. So make sure that those parentheses are definitely there because the number you're squaring is negative. And we know that that turns out positive, but without parentheses, our calculator will still say negative. Minus 4 times our a value, which is 1, times our c value, which is also 1. All divided by 2a. And so the 2 stays and the a becomes 1. Okay? Once we have that step done, so that's just plugging in, now we clean it up. All right, so a -6 becomes a +6. And when we type underneath, now you don't type in the radical, that stays on your paper. You just type what's underneath the radical. All right, so you're typing in -6 in parentheses and you're square it. To be honest with you, I type in 36, so I don't have to worry about typing it in with parentheses. I square it in my head. So I do 36 minus 4 times 1 times 1 in my calculator, and out comes 32. Okay. All divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Okay. Now what we're going to do is, because directions say simplest radical form, we take a look at our square root of 32. It is not perfect, and the largest perfect that goes in is 16, and it goes in 2 times. We circle the perfect, and that becomes 4 square root of 2, and this is going to get replaced in my next step. So I'm going to say x equals 6 plus or minus 4 square root of 2 divided by 2. Okay, and we have one last step to do. That 2 on the bottom divides not only the 6, but also the 4 square root of 2. Now, when it divides the 4 square root of 2, because the 2 is not underneath the radical, it's really only dividing that 4, okay, not the number underneath the radical. Okay, so here's our final answer. We would say x equals, this 6 divided by 2 is 3, plus or minus 4 square root of 2 divided by 2 is 2 square root of 2. Okay, so notice the 4 is the only number getting divided by the 2. The number underneath the radical stays. Okay, and there are our two answers. 3 plus 2 square root of 2, if you want to know what the decimal is, and 3 minus 2 square root of 2. And you can see that these answers look like they do when we do completing the square. And so we could have also solved this by completing the square and hopefully got the same answer in the end. But this is 4 steps versus when we do completing the square, it seems to be longer than 4 steps to get to our answer. So again, the quadratic formula, the formulas in math are supposed to make things easier for us. Okay, they look difficult because the formula looks difficult, but if you know how to use a formula, it's not that bad. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at number 2. So again, it says to use the quadratic formula in our directions. We might be able to factor it. We could solve it using completing the square, but because our directions say to use the quadratic formula, that's how we're going to work. Okay. In this one, though, we have one problem. Before using the quadratic formula, we have to be equal to 0. And so I'm just going to bring my 6 over, which makes it negative. Okay, so then I'm equal to 0. And now I can say my A is 2, my B is 11, and my C is negative 6. Okay, and now we'll plug them in. So we got x equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and clean it up. So we'll say x equals negative 11 plus or minus square root. And we're going to type in 11 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 6, which is 169. All over 2 times 2, which is 4. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and clean up the radical. However, the radical actually is perfect square. Square root of 169 is 13. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this and say x equals negative 11 plus or minus 13, not square root of 13, just 13. It's perfect, doesn't need a radical anymore, divided by 4. Okay, and now we could divide both of those by 4 if we wanted to, but because there's no radical, how we're going to separate them is we're going to do x equals negative 11 plus 13 divided by 4, and we'll do x equals negative 11 minus 13 divided by 4. Okay, negative 11 plus 13 on top here is a 2 divided by 4, which is 1/2. Okay. Negative 11 minus 13 is negative 24 divided by 4, which is negative 6. And now I can say one of my answers in simplest form is 1/2, and that my other answer is negative 6. And therefore, what that tells me is that I probably could have factored that if I tried to in the beginning, okay, because my answers turned out nice and rational. All right, let's take a look at 3 and 4. And again, guys, don't forget what the directions say. They want us to use quadratic formula, even if it might be factorable. Okay. Again, in order to use the quadratic formula, all of our variables have to be on, all of our terms, have to be on the same side. We have to be equal to 0. So 4x squared is going to stay here. I'm going to go ahead and bring over the 8x, so it's negative, and then bring over the 11, so it's also negative. And now I'll be equal to 0. And now I can tell you that A is 4, B is negative 8, and C is negative 11. Okay, and so our first step is to plug in. So x equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, all over 2A. All right, now we'll clean it up. That's a negative 8, which is positive 8. Plus or minus square root gets shorter, and we type in negative 8 squared. Make sure negative 8's in parentheses, otherwise you're going to get a wrong number. Okay, or you could just type in 64, which is what negative 8 squared is, minus 4 times negative 11, and you end up with 240, all divided by 2 times 4, which is 8. Okay. Directions do say simplest radical form, and 240 is not perfect, so we need to break it up into the largest perfect that goes into 240, and it might take us a while, but you're going to find that it's 16. The other number is 15. The only perfect square that goes into the square root of 15 is 1, and when that happens, I know that the square root of 16 is my largest, and it's going to become a 4 square root of 15. And so in my next step, I'm going to replace that and say x equals 8 plus or minus 4 square root of 15, all divided by 8. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and do the division by the 8, okay, on both of those. And so I end up with x equals 8 divided by 8, which is 1, plus or minus 4 square root of 15 divided by 8. You have to remember, guys, that it's just the 4 and the 8 are being divided, okay? And 4 divided by 8 reduces to 1/2. And so we end up with x equals 1 plus or minus 1/2 square root of 15, okay? You could also write your answer as 1 plus or minus square root of 15 over 2, okay? That is written the same exact way. Well, technically it's not written the same exact way, but it means the same exact thing, okay? Remember, guys, that your 1 is actually like right here, and so there's that 1/2. You can see it. Okay? So it does not matter how you write your answer. Know that they are the same, okay, in case it's a multiple choice question and you need to compare your answer to one of the ones given. All right, last one. Again, guys, we have to be equal to 0, okay? So we're going to go ahead and add that 5x over. And what happens is that it goes. And so we're only left with 2x squared minus 9 equal to 0. And so this happens sometimes, okay? That actually is not factorable. So we couldn't even factor it if we wanted to, even though the directions say that we are supposed to use complete quadratic formula, okay? You could technically complete the square to solve it. But again, quadratic formula is supposed to be very user-friendly, all right? So our A value, guys, is 2. Our B value is what you have to realize is missing. There is no x term, so B is 0, and our C is -9. Okay, and now we can go ahead and just plug into the quadratic formula. So we got x equals -b, so that's -0, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 0 squared, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So now we'll go ahead and clean that up. A -0 is really just 0, plus or minus the square root of 0 squared, which is 0, minus 4 times 2 times -9, okay, is 72. All divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. Okay, and so we can go ahead and now simplify our radical. 72 is not perfect, and the largest perfect that goes in is 36, and it goes in twice, okay? And that's going to become 6 square root of 2, and we'll replace that in our next step. And so we have 0 plus or minus 6 square root of 2 all over 4, okay? And now we'll go ahead and divide by 4 so that we can figure out our answers. So we have x equals 0 divided by 4 is 0, which we do not have to write it. Okay, and then we have, well, I'll write it, okay, plus minus. And then when we do 6 square root of 2 divided by 4, remember that it's the 6 and the 4 being divided, and 6 divided by 4 reduces to 3 divided by 2, square root of 2, okay? And so one of our answers is 0 plus 3 square root of 2 over 2, okay, which is just 3 square root of 2 over 2. That's one of my answers, okay? And then my other answer would be -3 square root of 2 over 2. And so I can either leave my answers like that, or I could left them like this, okay? Either one, it doesn't matter. These are a little bit cleaner because the 0 is gone, okay? All right, guys, so that's how to use the quadratic formula in order to solve for your roots or your zeros or your x-intercepts, okay? All right, I will see you guys on the backside.